Hey everybody, we're back with Sip with Sandwich. This is our installment to help explain the budget process, because you've probably been reading a lot about the budget process between what's going on in the House and the Senate. Of course, the Constitution says budget bills have to start in the House and they go into the Senate. Well, there's this little rule in the Senate that's been around for many decades called the filibuster rule. And typically, bills that go through the Senate can only get to the floor of the Senate if they have 60 of the 100 senators voting for the measure. There are exceptions, however. For example, through a process they call reconciliation for budgets in particular. But in order for a budget bill to go through reconciliation, it has to be subjected to what's called a Byrd Bath. Byrd Bath, what the heck is that? Well, Byrd Bath is named after a fellow by the name of Senator Robert Byrd, who was senator back when I was an intern back in the 1980s. Been around a long time. He's not with us any longer. But the basic rule is if it doesn't apply to the budget specifically, then it has to come out of the budget. So in other words, you can have your sandwich, but only if stuff in the sandwich belongs in the sandwich. So in this case, for example, in this budget, we got some things you may not like. For example, cucumbers, cuts to Medicaid. I don't like cucumbers very much, but they stay in the budget because they're budget related. There are other things, for example, like cuts to Pell Grants. I'm lactose intolerant. And I don't like cuts to Pell Grants either, but they stay in the budget. On the other hand, there's other stuff that doesn't belong in the budget based on the Byrd Bath. They're affectionately called bird droppings. They come out of the budget. So, for example, if you're eating your sandwich and all of a sudden you discover, oh, gross, there's a fidget spinner in my sandwich. Well, that's, for example, the sale of public land by the Bureau of Land Management. So Senate parliamentarian just this week said, no, does not belong in the budget. Can't sell federal land to balance the budget. Okay, fair enough. Similarly, you might come along across one of these here, iPods, and that also doesn't belong in the sandwich either. That is, for example, the requirement that sanctuary cities can't get federal funding. That was also taken out by the Senate parliamentarian, cannot be considered. You may find stuff like salt, and the Senate may or may not decide that goes in there. And then there are other things still, like, for example, I saw this quarter in my sandwich. That's kind of gross. I hate to bite into that thing. That would be, for example, the provisions around requirements for states to cover part of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which parliamentarian said he can't mandate states to do that in a budget bill. So sure enough, that stays out too, which is encouraging because you wouldn't want to bite into that in a sandwich. Now, all this to say, after the Byrd Bath, you're still done with this mixed metaphor of a sandwich that may in fact still be full of bird poop. And that's what the Senate's going to be voting on. Of course, I'm not going to eat this sandwich, nor should you, but the Senate's going to take a bite out of it, see what happens.